The story you are about to hear represents a missing piece in the puzzle of modern history. Without this knowledge, many contemporary events are simply beyond understanding. You are about to hear a man tell you that the major tax-exempt foundations of this land, since at least 1945, have been operating to promote a hidden agenda. And that agenda has nothing to do with the surface appearance of charity, good works, or philanthropy. This man will tell you that the real objectives include the creation of a worldwide collectivist state, including the Soviet Union, which is to be ruled from behind the scenes by those same interests which now control the tax-exempt foundations. The man who tells this story is none other than Mr. Norman Dodd, who in 1954 was the staff director of the Congressional Special Committee to investigate tax-exempt foundations, sometimes referred to as the Reese Committee, in recognition of its chairman, Congressman Carroll Reese. The interview you are about to see was conducted by me in 1982.
At that time, their interest shifts over to preventing what they call a reversion of life in the United States to what it was prior to 1914, when World War I broke out. And they arrive at that point, they come to the conclusion that to prevent a reversion, we must control education in the United States. And they realize that that's a pretty big task. So to them, it is too big for them alone, so they approach the Rockefeller Foundation with the suggestion that that portion of education which could be considered domestic be handled by the Rockefeller Foundation, and that portion which is international should be handled by the endowment. And they then decide that the key to the success of these two operations lay in an alteration of the teaching of American history. So they approach four of the then most prominent teachers of American history in the country, people like Charles and Mary Bird, and their suggestion to them is, will they alter the manner in which they present this subject, and they get turned down flat. So they then decide that it is necessary for them to do, as they say, build our own stable of historians. And then they approach the Guggenheim Foundation, which specializes in fellowships, and say, when we find young men in the process of studying for doctorates in the field of American history, and we feel that they are the right caliber, will you grant them fellowships on our say-so? And the answer is yes. So under that condition, eventually they assemble 20. And they take this 20 potential teachers of American history to London, and there they're briefed into what is expected of them when, as and if they secure appointments in keeping with the doctorates they will have earned. And that group of 20 historians ultimately becomes the nucleus of the American Historical Association.
The flu season is upon us. Which type will we worry about this year? And what kind of shots will we be told to take? Remember the swine flu scare of 1976? That was the year the U.S. government told us all that swine flu could turn out to be a killer that could spread across the nation. And Washington decided that every man, woman, and child in the nation should get a shot to prevent a nationwide outbreak, a pandemic. Well, 46 million of us obediently took the shot. And now 4,000 Americans are claiming damages from Uncle Sam amounting to $3.5 billion because of what happened when they took that shot. By far the greatest number of the claims, 2/3 of them, are for neurological damage or even death, allegedly triggered by the flu shot. We pick up the story back in 1976 when the threat posed by the swine flu virus seemed very real indeed.
This virus was the cause of a pandemic in 1918 and 1919 that resulted in over 500,000 deaths in the United States, as well as 20 million deaths around the world.
Joe brought it home from the office. He gave it to Betty and one of his kids, and to Betty's mother. But Betty's mother went back to California the next day. On her way to the airport, she gave it to a cab driver, a ticket agent, and one of the charming stewardesses. At school, Joe's kid gave it to some other kids, and Mrs. Merrill got it and gave it to her husband. In California, Betty's mother gave it to her best friend, Dottie, but Dottie had a heart condition and she died. But before she died, Dottie gave it to her girlfriend, the mailman, the paper boy, and the vet when she went to pick up her chihuahua.
If a swine flu epidemic comes, this is how it could spread. You'll want to be protected, especially if you're elderly or chronically ill. Get a shot of protection, the swine flu shot.
If we look at the 20th century and we look at the death chart of the 20th century, I think everybody would say, oh yeah, there must be a spike for World War I. You know, sure enough, there it is, like 25 million. And there must be a big spike for World War II, and there it is, it's like 65 million. But then you'll see this other spike that is as large as World War II right after World War I. And most people, a lot of people would say, well, what? What was that? There's two kinds of flus. There's flus that spread between humans very effectively, and there's flus that kill lots of people. And those two properties have only been combined into a widespread flu once in history. Well, that is Spanish flu. We have no idea where it came from. It's called the Spanish flu because the Spanish press was the freest. They were the first to talk openly about it. And so in the annals of epidemic history, that's the big event.
Education is a weapon whose effects depend on who holds it in his hand and at whom it is aimed. Joseph Stalin in an interview with H.G. Wells back in 1934. Now, Joseph Stalin was the biggest mass murderer of last century, and H.G. Wells was a member of the Fabian Society, and so was George Orwell, who wrote 1984, and Aldous Huxley, who wrote The Brave New World, both books of which were considered prophetic. And we have to understand they weren't prophetic because they too were members of the Fabian Society. George Orwell wrote, "He who controls the past controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past. He who controls the past, that's the history, controls the future. He who controls the present controls the past, the history." Going back to how I started this video off, the Norman Dodd interview, that's why I started off with this, to help you understand that they had to create, the powers that be, had to create a whole stable of historians so they could lie about the events that happened last century. Those three big events we've been lied to about: the two wars that killed 85 million people, and the one pandemic that killed around 20 million people. Remember Bill Gates saying there's two types of flus, there's one fast spreading and one that'll kill you. First time in history we had one that did both. How did that happen? You have to understand what really caused the Spanish flu back in 1918. They intentionally gave really bad drugs, vaccines, to the soldiers in the war, and they came down with diseases that were worse than any type of flu. But they warned everybody here in the States, oh my God, the soldiers are coming back and they've got the worst flu ever. You better line up for every vaccine we got. And that's exactly what happened, and that's what killed 500,000 Americans. And none of this could ever have happened, folks, if we didn't understand one more player that's a Fabian. Richard Russell, in his book, The Impact of Science on Society, published in 1953. Interesting, Dodd was in 1954. The 60 Minutes was in 1976. Bill Gates was 2015. But in 1953, in Richard Russell's book, he writes, diet, injections, injunctions, and then I'll paraphrase the rest, is how we're going to normalize people in the future so we can get them to do things they think they need to do. And they're doing the right thing, and yet it's just the opposite. And there's only one way that's possible. It's through normalizing power. And it's everywhere. It's in the school system. It's in the universities. It's in the family. Everywhere you look, folks, we're being normalized. The media, the TV, the commercials, the shows themselves, the movies. We're being normalized according to the Fabian Society's goal. Founded in 1884 to usher in a one-world collectivist state. That's why George Orwell, real name Eric Blair, wrote his book, 1984, the 100-year plan. We can't introduce socialism and communism. We've got to slowly integrate it through liberalism, slowly mold people's minds to think a certain way so that we can use a state of emergency to take away everyone's rights. And people will do it because we've been normalized to think it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do to protect everyone. You got to wear your mask, you got to social distance, you got to stay at home, you got to lock down. 4th of July is tomorrow. I'm taping this on the 3rd. And they just closed down the beaches down in Galveston. None are more hopelessly enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. Gerda. We can't see the bars, but I guarantee you, we're enslaved. Look what they're doing to us. And how are they able to accomplish it? It's what they've been doing to our brains. They've been normalizing us. They've been brainwashing us. They've been conditioning us to believe in certain things that just aren't true. And the biggest thing they don't want us to understand is the cause of disease. Now, 27 years ago, in 1993, in an issue of the New England Journal of Medicine, they came out as a very well-researched study, and their conclusion was 70% of our diseases are preventable. They're lifestyle related. And they went on to say that 8 out of 9 of the leading causes of death are lifestyle related. That's 89%. Back in 1993, oh my God, 70% of the diseases are lifestyle related. Are you guys learning anything about lifestyle at all? No, they don't teach you anything about lifestyles. They keep teaching you the same thing that they've always done to control the masses, to keep us sick and not understand the cause of disease. I did a very extensive video on Disease Mysteries Revealed, where I talk about the causes and solutions. It's a 50-minute video where I compare reality to what we're being told through conventional medicine. That we have, according to them, infectious diseases and then non-infectious diseases. And everything to them is based on what they call the germ theory. Got those infections. When you have inflammation, they believe it's bacterial induced or viral induced. It's not, it's the terrain. It's toxemia induced inflammation, which is what causes the other non-infectious diseases. In my video, I explain there's 2 short-term self-limited diseases that our so-called experts have been tricked into calling infectious diseases. And then there are 4 long-term stages of disease relative to non-infectious diseases. Now, on this side of the equation, in this group of diseases, doctors will openly admit they don't know the cause to virtually all of those. However, they will blame some of those on a disease itself. Classic example is blaming blindness, which is the number 1 cause here in America of blindness, is diabetes, and then they'll say the number 1 cause of chopping off limbs, gangrene, is also due to diabetes. Well, that's what functional medicine does too. They'll say, oh, we know the cause, it's your thyroid. When you blame a cause on another effect, then that's a subsequent cause. It can cause a problem, sure. The high blood sugar can cause problems with your vision. It can damage cells. Your cells are going to die if it doesn't get the blood inside there, right? That's why you go blind. That's why you don't get any blood to your extremities. They got to cut them off. But it's not the primary cause. We always got to go back to the primary cause when it comes to understanding diseases. And the predicament we're in right now, folks, is that most people don't know the cause of disease. In fact, in order to understand what's going on right now, in order to understand the lockdowns and the social distancing and wearing the mask, you have to understand what the real cause of disease is. So in order to understand A, you got to understand B. Most people don't know B. Even our so-called experts don't know B. And then, in addition to understanding the cause of disease, you also have to understand how the world works. Who's behind the curtain? And most people don't know that either. Although there are a lot of people who know who's behind the curtain, and there are a lot of people also that have a better understanding of the disease process than the average person. They may not have it as fine-tuned as I've done, or have been able to do in the last 30 years by studying everybody and putting it together and have my own way of saying it. 4 long-term stages of disease for the non-infectious diseases and 2 short-term self-limited diseases for the infectious diseases. But nonetheless, that's why we suffer. If you don't know the cause of disease, if you don't understand how the world works, you're going to be a victim of all that normalization. So what I'm trying to do is appeal to a lot of you guys who understand what's going on is not right. You see how the government is taking advantage of an emergency situation. And you don't really understand much else as far as the disease process. In fact, you can really understand how all the numbers are wrong, how they're lying about the testing, how the test itself doesn't work. But if you don't really understand the real cause of disease, then it's going to be real difficult to put all of this together. So what is the real cause of disease? Well, Dr. Max Gerson says all disease based on toxicity and deficiency, so all you got to do is detoxify and rebuild. And most of those do come from the toxemia side of the equation. And then there's endogenous toxins and exogenous toxins. So we can have things come from outside of us. Air pollution can be bad. But most of the problems we face is our own waste matter that backs up, and I explain that in a whole lot more detail in Disease Mysteries Revealed. Now what we have to realize is the fact that we have 2 main enemies. And this ties into what Moses said in the seen teachings from Enoch to the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because when he devoted his life, like I'm devoting my life to waking up the masses, I realized I have 2 main enemies or opponents. One, according to Moses, the arrogant rulers, and the other are the ignorant masses. Now, one way to look at society, especially in the worst form of power possible, sovereign power, where it's like a pyramid and you got one person or a group of people at the top of the pyramid. The rest of us, the normalized ones that are in the bottom of this pyramid. And then in the middle you have all those people that will do whatever the sovereign tells them to do. And the problem with all of us that are being normalized, that are at the bottom of this pyramid, we don't know how to solve this dilemma. We think we've got to do something with the thugs and the cretins that are above us, not realizing the solution lies within every one of us that's in the bottom of the pyramid. That's why we're in the predicament we're in. That's why it's up to each and every one of us to solve the crises we're in right now. Otherwise, we're embracing the worst form of government the world's ever seen, what they're going to be doing now in the name of health security or biosecurity, where they're going to use the most destructive power of all, biopower. Power over life, power over populations, power over our births and deaths and reproduction and illnesses. This is how government is controlling us. And my regular audience knows this because I say over and over, there's the ultimate tool of control and the absolute tool of control. The ultimate tool of control is our health, or more specifically our lack of health, or our belief system that we think these infectious diseases are outside of our control, when they're not due to the microbe, the germ, the bacteria, or the virus, those little beasties. It all has to do with the terrain. It all has to do with toxemia. And when it comes to the amount of people dying, which are about 15 million, they're all in one area, and it's mostly poor sanitation, malnutrition, which will set up the third problem, parasitic infection. Remember, everything vibrates, folks. There's bovis energy units that can measure how things vibrate. A healthy human should vibrate around 6,500. Microbes are way below that, and they can only attack things that are at their level. Cancer patients, according to this scale, are at 4,875. Bacteria around, or seems like I read somewhere where 4,500, but don't quote me on that one. I know they're below 6,500. So why is it that some bacteria can cause problems to some people who are weak? If they're living in poor sanitation, they don't have clean water, there's poor sanitation, they're living in filth, they're malnourished, now they're suspect to parasitic infection. You see, the same thing happens with plants that are grown with artificial fertilizers. That's why Dr. Fritz Albert Popp said that organic food has 5 times the biophotons as does conventional food. And even Dr. not Dr. Herbert Shelton, but Dr. Max Gerson pointed out, and he was murdered in 1959, that he was seeing more children being born with leukemia because of the chemical revolution in the 1940s, where they spray or they grow our food on artificial fertilizers. Because of that, they're vibrating at a low frequency, and now they're vulnerable to the pest. Again, certain things can only attack things if they're vibrating at their level. If we're healthy, if we're eating our species-specific diet, and if we're eating our biophotons, we're going to be vibrating at a level that no bacteria, no virus, or any other little beastie can come along and cause a problem to us. So, there's a simple solution to get out of this mess, except going back to that pyramid, the vast majority of us that have been normalized are going to find it virtually impossible to even entertain some of the ideas I'm suggesting. That's why I know in most cases we can't really say anything to convince people, but we get them to test an idea as time has come. We can get them to take a solid food vacation, and that's going to drastically change their terrain so fast. They should have an aha moment before too long. Now, you younger people who don't have a whole lot of problems might not see that aha moment like an elderly person will that's taken 15 drugs and has dozens of ailments, and virtually every one of those are going to go away when you change your terrain. As Louis Pasteur said on his deathbed confession, the microbe is nothing, the terrain is everything. So it's not an infectious disease. We're talking about poor sanitation. We're talking about malnutrition. We're talking about parasitic infection. And then with the other people that live in developed countries, 2.45 billion are obese and overweight, and 1.8% of them, close to 45 million, are going to die every year. You look at the amount of people starving. I calculated this a couple of months ago. It was 823 million. I double-checked it this morning. It's up to 844 million now. People are malnourished. But based on the 823 million and 15 million people die, is another 1.8%. So the point here is most people don't know the cause of disease. We're being tricked into thinking that the germ theory has some merit. But it doesn't. The terrain theory not only explains the so-called infectious diseases, but they also explain these long-term stages of diseases that they just label as non-infectious, but we don't know the cause. Heart disease, cancer, diabetes, arthritis, we don't know. But we got a monopoly on treating these because health is the ultimate tool of control. And none of that can be made possible for the absolute tool of control, which has to do with money, which has to do with the 2 wars we entered into. 3 big events that happened last century that Bill Gates talked about in the beginning of this video had to do with 2 big false beliefs that we have. One has to do with the belief in scarcity. And that's what those wars were all about. When countries break away from the powers that be and not let them print their money anymore, like Gaddafi did recently, they're attacked and demonized. Gaddafi was showing the whole continent of Africa that I can turn a desert into an oasis. Built a 2,500-mile river that he called the eighth wonder of the world. And what did we do? The UN went over there and bombed him. And I just read a comment a while back from someone, they even poisoned it with some sort of radiation so they could never use that water again. That shows you how sick the powers that be are. The psychopaths, the con artists, the magicians that are behind the curtain, getting our so-called experts to take the first step in the wrong direction, making them look at the symptom instead of the cause. That's why they don't know the cause. And then when they think they have the cause, what they're really looking at is a consequence. Allopathic medicine says we are evidence-based medicine. Look, here's our proof. Look at the pictures. Look what we got. Evidence-based proof. That's tantamount to going to every car accident you can find or you hear about that's reported, and you go there and you take a bunch of pictures. And you come back and you analyze all the pictures, and what do you see? Every accident, skid marks, skid marks, skid marks. You can even identify the skid marks as different types of skid marks. Oh, this is a radial 560 skid mark. Oh, this is a 2-ply 440. I'm just making up things. I don't know if there's tires named that or not, but you get my point. They're not proving anything. It's a trick. It's one big trick to get us to believe that disease is an entity. It's outside of our control. And to them, it's a war metaphor, isn't it? Got the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on cancer. Now we've got a war on viruses. It's really a war on the population. It's all about controlling us, folks. We've been normalized. We've been conditioned to think and believe a certain way in the same way we've been conditioned not to steal or kill people. And yet some people do it, but the masses don't. And how the masses look at the ones who aren't doing what they're doing according to how we've been normalized. You're crazy. What's wrong with you? Why aren't you wearing your mask? Why are you standing so close to me? Why do you want to go to the beach when they tell you to lock it down? Don't you know you can spread this virus? Do you even know viruses have never even been proven to exist, ever? In an interview with the electron microscope president back in 2014, he came out and said, when the virus hunters looking for the HIV causes AIDS virus couldn't find it, they had to invent molecular markers. So now when they test us and they say we've got it, what they're only identifying would be a molecular marker, not a virus. Keeping in mind, this test has an 80% false positive result to begin with. So if you got 100 cases, you really only got 20, and then of the 20, you're not identifying a virus. You're identifying, in most cases, what's known as an exosome, especially when it comes to the coronavirus, because when you look at pictures, electron microscope pictures of these, they are identical. Whether it's inside the cell or outside the cell, they look exactly like what they call a coronavirus. Oh boy. And remember, it's a frozen picture. So they can never show a life cycle of a virus doing anything. It's the same thing as taking a picture of a skid mark at a car accident. And they think that it's the cause. So when you go in with a false premise, as allopathic medicine does, always saying the germ, the microbe, the virus is the cause, you go out there looking for your evidence. That's what pathologists do. They look for clues. Oh, look what we found. We found some bacteria at the scene of the crime. The bacteria don't eat healthy tissue. They only go after tissue that's vibrating down by their level. Dead tissue, dying tissue. They're doing their job. It's not right to blame them. And what's wrong is to say, hey, they're the reason why you have the inflammation. No, they're not. In almost every case, it's always toxemia-induced inflammation. But, you know, I had some gravel fly in my eye a couple years back. I even did a video on that form of inflammation. Anytime we have something inside of us that doesn't belong there, the body's going to try to get rid of it. And when we look at these 4 long-term stages of disease, the first symptom is inflammation, and it's obvious the body's trying to get rid of something. The second stage is even more obvious when it turns into an ulceration. Now I got a big old opening trying to get rid of some toxemia. Remember what Hippocrates said? Diseases are crises of purification, of toxic elimination. Most of our problems come from auto-intoxication. 2 bathrooms, we eat, we eliminate, our cells eat, they eliminate, those bathrooms don't get filtered, they back up, there's the disease process. It explains self-limited diseases, and it explains the long-term stages of the disease. It also can explain another form of self-limited disease, the other one where we have food poisoning. The symptoms are a lot different because when it goes in, we try to get rid of it immediately, don't we? We mostly see vomiting and diarrhea. But when we consume things that we don't eject immediately, then it can back up. And that's what gets us in trouble. And I explain that again in much more detail on Disease Mysteries Are Revealed, where I explain the causes and solutions. Another good video for newcomers to watch is What is the Healthiest Diet for Humans, where I explain where we have 10 body systems. We have to understand how these 10 body systems work in order to understand how to tweak what we're doing. Because we're not living in an ideal world anymore. We might need to modify our species-specific diet. But the main thing we got to do is make sure we go back to eating those biophotons. That's what got us in trouble. That's why we suffer so much. It is the ultimate solution. When you look at that pyramid, where you got one or a group at the top, a bunch of thugs in the middle making sure we stay down below, the only solution to get out of that is to bump up our biophotons. And the only way we're going to do that is by eating our species-specific diet. And when that happens, guess what happens to this power structure? No one's going to want to be a thug in case there's any sick people left that want to control us. It's all dependent upon the Praetorian class, the police, the military. And let's not forget how we've been normalized through the schools, the universities, the hospitals, the psychiatric clinics, the movies, the TV shows, the commercials. Reminds me a lot of the 5%ers, just like Moses saying he had 2 big obstacles, the arrogant rulers and the ignorant masses. With the 5%ers, they claim to be the righteous leaders, righteous teachers rather, the 5%ers who understand the law of cause and effect. 10% are part of the top of that pyramid that are keeping the rest of the 85% where we are. And they came out and said they're the ignorant masses. And that's what we're up against. But how can you challenge a person's belief system when they've been normalized their entire life? Ever since they've been brought up, they've been taught that the most obvious warning sign that's going off on the dashboard of our car, our body, is outside of our control. In fact, a lot of people understand how we can use our body and a car as an analogy, because we put fuel in a car, we put fuel in the body too. But when you look at a car, it has a dashboard, and there's all sorts of gauges and instruments, and now we got computers that can tell what's going on with the car. Well, our body's no different. Remember, we have a feedback system. We make lifestyle choices, and then we have a feedback system that tells us how well we're satisfying our needs. So every time we don't satisfy our needs and we have a symptom, it's like a light bulb or a gauge or an instrument or something on the dashboard of our body telling us you got a problem. And in most cases, it's the wrong fuel. But when we look at the ones that keep going off all the time, think about it. We got a fuel gauge in there. You got a water gauge. You got a temperature gauge. You got all sorts of gauges that can measure what's going on in the body. You got a biophoton level gauge. And according to Dr. Pop, we're only around 1,000 to 23,000. We should be at 83,000. That's the biggest problem with our vehicle. But we have warning signs going off all the time. The one that goes off more than ever is the hunger spell light. Warning, warning, hungry, hungry, hungry. But it's false hunger. As Plato once said, whatever deceives men seems to produce a magical enchantment. We're under the hunger spell. When we don't eat our biophotons, when we don't eat our species-specific diet, it creates a false hunger down here, which is nothing less than a withdrawal symptom. So when everyone else around the world said, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry, and they had this all gone, gnawing feeling in their stomach, that's a withdrawal symptom. You're under the hunger spell because you're not eating natural foods. You're not eating the food you're designed to eat. You're altering them. You're destroying the biophotons. And that bulb is going off, that light is going off all the time, isn't it? But then there's another light that goes off more than any other light. And it should be the one light that tells us we're putting in the wrong fuel more than anything else. And that's the light for colds and flus. And what do? We take our car to the doctor or the mechanic and they go, up, don't worry about the fuel you're putting in there. Just caught a virus. Diseases are body initiated. When you get a cold or a flu, your bathrooms are backing up and exiting through your nose and sinus areas. If it goes into the lungs, they call it pneumonia. If it comes out your skin, they've got hundreds of names for that. And then it goes into our tissues. When it goes into the tissues, it goes through those 4 stages: inflammation, ulceration, induration. And then the last stage is where we have the tumors, the cysts, the fibroids, the nodules, the calcifications. The body's trying to protect itself in the last 2. The body's trying to get rid of it in the first 2. It's really quite simple. So, I've mentioned many times on my channel, it's up to you guys, the trim tabs of society, to figure out how can we reach the tipping point. And if the tipping point, I'm thinking out loud here, if the tipping point revolves around something we've been normalized around, do we need more than 10%? Is there a higher number we have to reach to get the effect of the 100th monkey now? Because we're dealing with something that's been normalized? I don't think so, no. I think that's the whole idea behind critical mass. Once we finally reach enough people. Once enough people do this and they show to everybody, look what happened to me. I didn't focus on those drugs that were given to me because I found out that those were all lifestyle related. Now I'm on the hero's journey. Because the definition of a hero is someone can solve a problem no one else can solve. Most of our problems are self-inflicted. When you take responsibility and change your terrain, you become your own hero. And you see that for yourself. And everybody you know sees that. And that's the only thing that can change this pyramid we have right now. Where the masses of us are being controlled. Our liberties are taken away. We think we are free, but just because we can't see the bars. And yet, here we are locked down, forced to wear a mask, forced to stand separate from each other. And the whole purpose of all of this is to reinforce their germ theory of disease. In fact, they've done such a good job right now, if we don't do something now, we may never, ever overcome this. Think about it. We're being normalized at a level right now where little kids are told by their parents what's going on. Parents, they're the number one source of normalization right there, because they're just feeding back to the children how they've been normalized throughout society, and then when we're born, they normalize us the way they've been normalized. Imagine being a parent explaining to little children what's going on, the coronavirus. Why are you wearing a mask? Oh my God, you go outside, everybody's wearing a mask. This is 1,000 times worse than being told you don't have to eat biophotons, and everywhere you go, everyone's not eating biophotons. It's the same thing, except now it's at a level that's overwhelming. Again, this is an important time right now for us to wake up, to help everyone you know realize there's something they can do about their health. They need to understand the power of changing their terrain. They got to try a solid food vacation. Go the distance so they can have that aha moment and have a better understanding of the cause of disease. The infectious diseases we may still struggle with a whole lot, but think about the ratio. 3 times as many people are dying around the world of non-infectious diseases than they are infectious diseases. And these babies, most of them are going to go away when you change your terrain. So will the infectious diseases, but you may still struggle until you include de-indoctrination with your detoxification. Because that's what it's going to take. We've been normalized, we've been conditioned, we've been brainwashed to think a certain way. so that no one has to force us to do anything, because we think it's what we're supposed to do. In the same way, you wouldn't go out and start killing people or raping people or stealing from people. The same way we've been normalized to do those things, we've been normalized now to protect other people from our germs. And beware of their germs. Boy, I tell you, when it comes right down to it, life is an illusion. And when you wake up to that rally, you realize this has got to be the worst Twilight episode ever. I'm convinced it is. I've seen lots of Twilight Zone episodes, and nothing is as frightening as the one we're living right now, where you see the vast majority of people so easily controlled, and how their minds have been so easily molded and manipulated decade after decade after decade, going back to the Fabian society, to usher in this one world collectivist state. The powers that be are able to do what they're doing today because they've been preparing for this for the last 100 years. Well, I've been preparing for this for 30 years. It's all I've done for the last 30 years. I've been in school for the last 30 years. I have over 7,500 files now I've amassed. And I study everything I think I have to study to get an idea of what's going on. And I love studying what other people think is going on, especially if it confirms what I've been saying all along. And that just happened to me in the last week, where I studied this French historian and philosopher, Michel Foucault. I studied this Italian philosopher, Giorgio Agamben. And then there's this Italian, or French rather, health historian, Patrick Zilberman. And they all talk about health security, or biosecurity, and how this has become a big part of state and international political strategies. In the last 30 years, they see this on the rise, and how this is going to form the worst form of government we've ever seen. Another video I'd like to mention that ties into this is Satan's Secret Weapon, where I explain how governments go through cycles and how democracy goes through cycles and how it all started with aglachery. That's where the mob is out of control. That's what created the need for government. So a lot of people realize what the government is doing to us, how they're using the state of emergency to control us. In fact, that was by Giorgio Agamben in 2003. He wrote State of Exception. Again, where he pointed the same thing out, where governments were realizing how they could use a state of emergency to take away our rights. And that's exactly what's happening right now. With Foucault, he said there are three types of power. He explains sovereign power. That's, again, we use the pyramid as an example. Then there's disciplinary power. That has to do with the individual alone. But then we got biopower. And biopower has killed more people than any other power before it. And this is, again, power over life, power over populations, power over disease, power over death, power over birth, power over reproduction. We've got to be controlled because we're out of control. So the solution to solve all of our problems is to go back to the very first cause and realize, why do we have this subsequent need for government? Why do we even have a subsequent need for power? Well, power ties in to fear. Fear ties into not eating biophotons. If you're new to my channel, biophotons, that sunlight energy that's beaming on me right now, soaking up that vitamin D off my skin, that sunlight energy is stored in the nucleus of our cells, provided we eat food that's still alive. All living systems, plants, animals, and fungi have that sunlight energy in their cells, and that's how cells communicate. And we're supposed to be eating them while they're still living. And that sunlight energy is coherent sunlight energy. It's how cells communicate. And this is why we struggle. This is why we have the wrong mentality. It's why we have a need for power, because deep down we know something's not right. That's why most of us turn to the wrong food or sex or drugs or money or relationships trying to get that warm, fuzzy feeling we're missing that can only come when we're vibrating at the right frequency with the highest amount of biophotons in our cells, which should be around 83,000 according to Dr. Fritz Albert Popp. And we're born at 43,000, most of us because we're not eating our biophotons are around 1 to 23,000. Remember, according to Popp, the organic food has 5 times the biophotons as does conventional. And then, if you kill the food, if you cook it, it has 0 biophotons. So that's all we have to do right there, folks. Really simple. Change our diet. What did Margaret Mead say? It's easier to change a man's religion than his diet. Something to that effect. That's why I say you got to take a solid food vacation. You got to see what you're missing. The average person is not in the position. In fact, no one is in the position, unless they've done this, to know what they're doing and what they need to do. Because they're not going to think it's a fair trade. Life is an illusion. They love what they eat. And how can we not? As soon as we cook our food, we start molesting our eyes with new colors, our nose with new aromas, and our taste buds with new flavors. It's what cooking does. Puts us under a spell. Then we have this withdrawal symptom, this false hunger. That light's going off on our dashboards all day long. Got to feed our drug of choice, unnatural food. So, as I mentioned, I like it whenever I study somebody and they confirmed what I've been saying, as did Foucault, Zilberman, and Agabin. They all are talking about the same thing, about how health security is going to be the form of government that's being rolled out upon us right now. In the last 30 years, they've been seeing it, and it's going to be the worst form of government ever. And it's made possible because of the books of bullshit we've been put in our brain that I explained in Satan's Secret Weapon. It all has to do with this normalizing power, where they, day after day after day after day, get us to do what we think we want to do, because we've been programmed to think that way. Reminds me of one other person I studied that confirmed I was on the right path, and that's Tolstoy. Wrote that great 25-page essay as a foreword to that book, The Ethics of Diet by Howard Williams. Tolstoy said the first step is what we have to take to solve our problems. His first step is the same as my first step. They're both solid food vacations. For Tolstoy, it was on water. For me, I've updated it. I modernized it, if I can steal that word from the powers that be, and put it on juices instead of water. Remember, Tolstoy said, we live in an evil world. It's like a 2-story house. We're addicted to our evil way of life. We're gluttons. Got to get to the second story. There are stairs or steps we got to take. They're sequential. They have to do with our virtues. Too many of us who are trying to do good focus on the higher virtues, not realizing why we still struggle so much, nor realizing the value and the importance of the very first step, self-control, or as Christians would say, self-renunciation. So that's Tolstoy's solution to get us out of this dilemma we're in. Got to take the first step, gain back control over what you eat, because you're not eating your biophotons, you're not eating your species-specific diet. And when you take a solid food vacation and you start eating your biophotons and you start eating your species-specific diet, I guarantee you, ow, you're in for a treat.